Good morning, and this is the Adult Sunday School lesson from Mount Vernon Baptist Church for February the 28th. Our lesson today is taken from Genesis 48, 49, and 50, and our title for today's lesson is Promises for the Future. Our application very strong. The student will comprehend the importance of acceptance and forgiveness and forgive others as Christ has forgiven us. Prayer requests are repetitive and much needed. We need to be strongly in prayer for those who are struggling with the virus and just as strong for those who fight it. Let's take time this week to be much in prayer for our shut-ins. Let's not be weary for well-doing, and let's help them to remember that we remember them, and we ask the Lord to comfort them, have compassion upon them, and help them to find our study journey. Now, in our final study journey today in the book of Genesis, we will see God's future plans for the tribes of Israel, given by Jacob just before he dies. In that final epitaph, Jacob will use a command for the tribe of Judah which will reconfirm the prime position of this tribe among all the other tribes of Israel. He will use a word we have not seen before to describe the future of the tribe of Judah. That word is Shiloh. Jacob will say that God commanded this tribe to hold the scepter of ruling all other tribes until Shiloh is come. The place known as Shiloh was the worship place where the tent of tabernacle rested, with the Ark of the Covenant within it, from the time of Joshua through the time of the judges, all the way until the end of the life of Eli. To worship Yahweh at the place commanded, faithful believers had to go to Shiloh. Now Jacob reveals the coming time of the Messiah and says it shall be a time when they no longer must go to Shiloh, because Shiloh will come to them. Jesus confirmed this foretelling to the Samaritan woman at the well of Jacob in Samaria. He said that the place of worship no longer mattered, because God was now to be worshiped in spirit wherever a believer was. As he opened his gospel to the Gentiles in this moment with this woman, Jesus revealed that he himself was the Messiah that had come. This is the only time that Jesus will reveal this fact until his mock trial. And his revealing, we see here, was not to a Jew, but to a Gentile serial fornicator. Here in the Gospel of John was the ancient command of Jacob fulfilled. Now, knowing this truth, we're ready to enter our final study journey stop in the book of Genesis. We come to the final stop on our study journey through Genesis in this lesson. Though there have been many lessons provided in this study, this journey now brings us arriving at the conclusion of the time in Egypt for the chosen family of God. The 7 years of plenty had provided for the years of famine, and God's chosen one, Joseph, had guided the entire nation of Egypt and surrounding lands through the dark times of famine successfully. Now, the terrible famine had ended, and life had returned to normal, and Jacob and his sons and extended family lived safely in Goshen, the fertile section of Egypt that had been given them by the Pharaoh through Joseph. The time was quickly approaching for the end of the mortal life of Jacob. Jacob told Joseph that God had appeared to him again and had blessed him. He also told Joseph that the 2 sons that were born to Joseph in Egypt, Ephraim and Manasseh, were to be considered as his own sons were to him. At that moment, Jacob adopted these 2 men. In chapter 49, verse 1, we see the final act in the life of Jacob. Here's what this verse tells us. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Here he prepares to impart the prophecy given him by God for each portion of his large family, which would be the 12 tribes of the legacy of Israel. The words of blessing were accurate, but were not equal. 3 of the sons were given prophecies that showed their past conduct cost them future blessings. Hebrews 11:21 will later teach us that in this moment Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph, and he saw this as an act of worship as he leaned upon the top of his staff. Jacob required Joseph to swear an oath to take him back to the resting place of Abraham and Isaac and bury him there. Jacob gave the oath. He asked Joseph to assure what he would want, and he did assure his father of what he would want and that he would swear an oath to make it happen. And we remember that Jacob, who had been known as the deceiver, was regenerated away from that name by God, and he became Israel by the command of God. Sorrows had multiplied on the life of Jacob, with the very worst being that he had believed Joseph, his favored son, to be dead for over 20 years through the lie of his other sons. God had allowed this lie to remain, and it's likely the most powerful scriptural proof of this, of Hebrews 12, which will later tell us that whom the Lord loveth much, he chasteneth much. But the lie was ultimately revealed and overturned as God led the family to Egypt to sustain them through the dark and hungry years. Now in chapter 49, Jacob speaks to all of his sons, giving them not only his divine prophecy for them, but also for the tribes that would come from them. Reuben would not prosper, even though he was firstborn. He had shown that he was unstable, as he brought great sin upon himself by having an illicit relation with Rachel's maid, Bilhah, who was his father's concubine. The next 2 sons, Simeon and Levi, heard similar words, as they had conducted the murderous retaliation on the city of Shechem, avenging the rape of their sister Dinah. Simeon's tribe would be the smallest and the weakest of all, and their inheritance would be coupled with the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Levi would be scattered and have no inheritance except to serve the Lord later as priests. Judah had received the position of firstborn due to the sins of his older brothers, and he was to be a lion, and every legitimate king of Israel would spring from him, starting with David. His tribe would be the leading tribe, and a special blessing was given, as Jacob says that the scepter of ruling would remain with them until Shiloh was come, meaning until the Messiah arrived. Judah's land portion would be the most fertile of all the lands that were given. Zebulun would be the next blessed. He was given land at the Great Sea, and they would later be known as fierce warriors and would be a major portion of David's army, as we learned in 1 Chronicles 12:33. Issachar, the older brother of Zebulun, was described as a strong donkey. They were the 3rd largest by population, but were seen to be weak and lazy, being often conquered by others and made slaves to outsiders. Dan, the eldest son by Bilhah, was to be the judge of his people. Samson, the strongest of the judges, would later come from this tribe. But Jacob said that Dan would be a serpent, and this prophecy was fulfilled, as this is the tribe that led Israel into idol worship. They rejected the land given and later settled into the far north of the promised land. Gad, the firstborn of Zilpah, was next. This tribe strongly supported the army of David with troops and were known to be highly courageous in battle. In the days of the prophet Jeremiah, this tribe was overcome by outside armies, but did later prevail and remained a tribe. Asher, the youngest son of Zilpah, was next. He was blessed with some of the finest land, and it would have an abundance of grapes, wheat, olives, which made the tribe very rich. Naphtali was next blessed as a hind let loose. he giveth goodly words. His land would be near to the Sea of Galilee, and Christ later spent most of his ministry there preaching and teaching those goodly words. Jacob preserved the best words for Joseph, but he was to be blessed in a double portion through his two sons that had been born in Egypt, and there would be no tribe known as Joseph. Jacob saw the hands of God moving in the family through Joseph in his life, and he was joyful that he had been shown it by the Lord. Jacob saved his last blessing for Benjamin, the youngest son of Rachel. He was said to be like a ravenous wolf who sneaks up on prey and kills it and then divides it among his own. The cruelty of this tribe was described in the book of Judges through the cruel descendant Ehud, a Benjamite. King Saul, his son Jonathan, and the apostle Paul were all from this tribe. All of these sons and their people would survive several centuries in Egypt and would eventually leave in the Exodus toward the Promised Land with between 1 and 2 million souls. Next, after these many prophetic blessings, were shown in 49:29 through 33, the death of Jacob. In this passage, the burial view of death and the hereafter is given to us. Jacob was 147 years old. He was said to be gathered unto his people, to live with them eternally in the presence of God. Here we are allowed a glimpse of what happened to faithful souls after death in the Old Testament times. Death is only a door to the hereafter. Each faithful soul would go into the presence of God to be with their family who had gone before. This transfer was taught by Jesus in Luke 16, and he said it was a place of rest in Abraham's bosom. And there these souls remained at rest until the harrowing of this place by Jesus in the 3 days between his burial and resurrection. When Jesus went there, he took all these faithful souls to heaven, and from that time forward, this place is known only as hell, where only the souls of the unsaved reside, awaiting the great white throne. This last section of Genesis concludes with the renewal of God's promises for his chosen people, for Israel, and for the fulfillment of those promises through the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph is given to us as a powerful example of faith, for he remained faithful no matter the circumstances of his life. He clearly knew that God was in control of his life, and so he acknowledged that fact to his brothers. His prospering in the house of Potiphar, to his fellow prisoners when he was in prison, and to Pharaoh himself. Our study journey has allowed us over many chapters to see clearly that God is in full control, and without God, we wallow in the darkness of this world. Genesis teaches us that if we act on the principle of faith in the Lord, we will find help and spiritual health and true happiness in this life. This great teaching is rendered to us in the first book of the Lord's holy word. The individuals we have met were not perfect. They were sinners. Some repeated the same sin more than once, but none were forsaken. None were left behind. Now, at the end of this stop on our study journey, after the death and the burial of Jacob, we're allowed one last teaching. Joseph's brothers felt that since Jacob was now dead, that Joseph still held ill will in his heart, which he had held all of his life toward these brothers, and he would now seek revenge for what they had done to him so very long ago. They sent a messenger with that fear that they held for Joseph after Jacob had died. And when Joseph heard the messenger, he wept when he heard the words. When the brothers came into his presence once more, Joseph reminded them that he had cared for them, fed them and their families, protected them in Egypt, arranged for them to get the best land, and shown them his true self. With his high position of the second in charge of the entire nation of Egypt, He could have easily worked retribution against them if he had chosen to do so, but he had not. All of the brothers bowed to Joseph, and Joseph told them to have no fear of him. We must not overlook that here, as our study ends, the original dream vision given to Joseph is fulfilled completely, just as God intended and foretold. He showed them complete grace and full forgiveness, reminding them that God had turned their evil into good, both for Joseph and for them. Because Joseph believed that the Lord oversaw every human situation, especially in the lives of his own chosen ones, Joseph was able to show sincere compassion and true love to his brothers. We should remember our powerful application given to us today as we begin this last stop on our study journey in Genesis. It speaks of forgiving others as Christ has forgiven us. Jesus reminds us 7 times in the Revelation that he who has an ear must hear. Next in our study journey, we will move forward to this very teaching of our Messiah as given to us in the Gospel of Matthew. I hope to see you here.